Excited to introduce this workshop tonight. Over the course of COVID, during the spring of 2020, heading into that school year, the fall of 2020, we had done some work through the curriculum committee at the time. At the time, the committees were separate, to revise a couple of our policies related to library and instructional materials, and particularly, the selections and the procedures associated with that. So those were approved, I believe, on October 6, 2020. And recently, at the end of last year, our library coordinator, Meg Rooks, who I'll introduce more formally in just a minute, identified, additional changes, or actually kind of historical changes that had been lost in that transition, to add back to the policy, specifically around the procedure around challenged materials. So that felt like an essential piece to be able to kind of correct and include in our policies and procedures moving forward. So given that much of these changes happened, before virtually all of the board members here, except for Vice Chair Bondo and Member Figdor, had been seated, we felt like it was helpful to kind of provide the full context to the whole board about what the changes had been and the rationale at that time, so that they could understand the proposed changes that we're putting forward at this time. So tonight's workshop is just to kind of remind for some folks, bring everybody else up to speed on the work that's been done to kind of update these policies. Obviously, we know since then, and huge credit to Meg and our librarian team in general for kind of being ahead of the curve in terms of updating our policies, because certainly since then, over the past year plus, we've seen a lot more challenges and issues in locally and nationally, none within Portland, but certainly in adjacent communities. So the process tonight is just to kind of make everybody aware and understand. We will review the actual proposed changes in terms of the proposed language at the Curriculum and Policy Committee meeting next week. And pending that discussion and potential committee action, we would bring it back to the board for a kind of first and second read, as is typical. Though, given this workshop, we may not need, though we'll make that decision to do a workshop when we bring the revised policies back, given this conversation tonight. So if that all goes well, we would kind of formally adopt by our second meeting in September is the potential trajectory, but we'll have further conversation in the Curriculum and Policy Committee meeting next week. So with that kind of introduction and overview, I'm really excited to introduce Meg Rooks. Meg has been the district's librarian coordinator since I've been here, so you can speak to how long even before that, and have known her to be a steadfast advocate. She's been an equity leader in schools in our system, and I've always appreciated collaborating with, has been a collaborator at the system level and at the building level in the building she's worked in, and like I said, has been a leader for us, and I'm sure across the state in terms of ensuring that we have strong libraries and strong systems, policies, and procedures to ensure that we have a wide range of literature and books and resources available to all of our students. So, Meg, if you want to go ahead, I will get the PowerPoint going.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is, again, a presentation that we did a couple years ago, and we did this work back in 2020. So the PowerPoint that we're going to share with you is actually the PowerPoint from there. And it just kind of walks us through the changes and the rationale behind those changes that we made back then. And just to make it clear, the proposed changes that you'll see highlighted in red are actually ones that have already been voted through. There is another change / omission that's highlighted in pink, which is the one that we would like to vote to bring back. So hopefully that will be more clear as I go through. So here are the objectives. And again, these are for the changes that have already been voted on, but the rationale behind coming to the board and proposing these changes as the librarians in the district was really just to firm up our policies, because we could see the number of challenges that we're seeing across the state, and an uptick in the informal challenges that we were seeing in our district. And so we just wanted to make sure that our current policies aligned with best practices put forth by the American Library Association, and specifically the American Association of School Libraries. And then we just wanted to make some edits to the existing policies around library media centers, selection, and procedures, just to update the language, make sure it squares with what was actually happening in the different schools. And then specifically for the challenge materials, there's some wording that we wanted to change, like really minor but important wording that you'll see as we go through. And so I don't need to read this whole thing, but everyone can see that, right, Aaron?
Mhm.
They can read through it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so there are 3 different policies we're looking at: the Instructional Media Center, the selection policy, and the challenge policy. For the IGJNC proposed edits, we wanted some wording around the goals and organization that better reflected what was actually happening in our district with our school library media specialists. And then we wanted to change the wording around our relationship with the Portland Public Library, just to update it to make it reflect what was actually happening between us and the Portland Public Library. And so if we look at those edits. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, the original wording was more kind of a passive role of the librarian and didn't really speak to our collaborative work that we do with teachers and the teaching that we do year round. And so we wanted to change the wording to include that. We changed the wording around the staffing at each school, because that has been in flux as the years have gone by. So we just wanted to give it a more, I think, flexible wording was the thinking around that. And then a lot of this wording was just really dated and didn't really speak to how the librarians across the district curate non-print materials. And so we wanted to change the wording around to encompass all of that. We also wanted to change the wording around selection. And I think it spoke a little bit to that up there, to make it clear that at the building level, the library media specialist is the one who does the selecting of the materials in the library. Originally, I think it was, here we have the wording saying under the supervision of the superintendent. I think the original wording was a little less clear around that. This is the wording around the Portland Public Library that we got rid of. We used to have several branch libraries in the district, at Reiki, at Ocean Ave, and we still do have one at Riverton/Talbot. And we used to collaborate a lot more closely with the Portland Public Library around the summer reading program. We still do collaboration, but it looks a little bit different. Yeah. And that was we have an interlibrary loan program throughout the district where we share materials on a pretty regular basis across the libraries in our district. There was language in the old policy that spoke to interlibrary loan outside of our school district or between the school district and the public library, and we don't do that. And so we were getting rid of that language. And then lastly, this comes right from the American Library Association's Bill of Rights. And we wanted to include this wording, and a lot of districts have also adopted this language to kind of bolster our commitment to intellectual freedom as a district. And so you can read through that, but that is directly from the American Library Association. And there's further wording down there that is specific to school libraries. So this is their general statement around intellectual freedom in libraries. And then if you scroll down, there's specific wording around school library media programs. And so having the board adopt that was felt really great.
Yeah. Member Opperman, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question about, you were saying interlibrary loans with Portland Public, but you still do loans with the state systems of not at all?
We don't. And I've been in the district for 9 or 10, maybe this is my 10th year. We haven't done it since I've been here. And I don't think, I think mostly in the past, because we haven't had the manpower, we've been pretty understaffed until pretty recently. And I honestly don't know through what system that worked. So we'd have to have some sort of way of getting books back and forth, and I really don't know. We do have access to a lot of resources online. We have access to digital materials through the Maine Digital Library, and our students have access to the Portland Public Library through the Seed Card program, which changed names, and now I'm blanking on the new name. But we do have a system where kids can automatically borrow books from the Portland Public Library, digital and print.
Thank you. It's just something that I taught high school, and there were times when it was useful to be able to access something that it wasn't in our school or in the it's smaller school, of course.
Yeah, students absolutely can through the Portland Public Library.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Versus is what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Member Bonda?
I just want to make sure then we don't, because I see on those rights here, I see then we have a 6 points, but on the screen I see 7. So I just want to make sure then we don't miss any other one. Oh, I'm on the wrong one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do see. So we'll look at that,
Okay.
and if that's an issue, we can clean that up. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
The board members have the attached current policies that should be reflecting all the changes that you're reviewing. But the enumerated ones only go 1 through 6. So we can look at that, Meg, and talk about it at committee next week.
Yeah, I have no recollection of why that would be.
Anything else on IJNC that you wanted to highlight in terms of changes? Meg?
Nope, I think that's it. I don't think there's anything. Yeah, I think that was it.
Right. Right.
All right, and we just talked through that. And we talked through that. Okay, so this next policy is selection of educational materials. And the revisions that we want to make, again, we're making it clear that the role of library media specialist is the person who's selecting the materials in our school libraries. and some additional wording, which I think we spent quite a while wordsmithing to speak to our district's goals of equity as it results to our collection and development efforts.
No, wait, that's
So this is, shoot, I might have had the wrong link. It actually might be here. Let's see if this links to IJJ. Yeah.
yeah. I have it up now, Meg, if you want to talk.
Yeah. So a lot of this is in red, but I don't think a ton of this was changed. I think it was like minor wordsmithing to update it. But, you know, most of these policies are pretty standard. Like if you go to another district, the wording is exactly the same, which I'm guessing is because most of them are written by lawyers. So the changes that we made were pretty subtle in here.
And these are changes that have already been made. Is that correct?
Yeah, these are all ones that we voted on in
Just double
2020,
checking.
which seems like so long ago.
There. I mean, I see this red is similar to the other language around the.
Yeah, and I think it matches. I don't know why it's in two places.
And then.
Yep. And so this is where I think, I don't know if Barrett is still there, but I think Barrett helped us with some of the wording around this. But in that description of how we select materials, there was some thought put into the wording to make sure or try to make sure it reflected our, you know, our desire to have diverse collections that reflect our communities. Okay, and then this pink part is our actual challenge procedure. And it's pink because it was originally, it was all slashed through because we thought it made more sense to move it to the IJJR2 policy. And then it never got moved. So when I was looking at our policies last spring and thinking like, oh my gosh, it could be any day that we would have a challenge just because so many of them were happening. I realized that there was our procedure was not in there. And so the reason it's pink is that I want to make sure it's put back in so that if a challenge happens, we have the procedure lined, the procedure is right there, ready to be enacted if need be. So I have not changed the procedure. This is the procedure that was in the original. So I don't know if we want to look at it, if we want to consider if we like the wording, if it sounds good.
Well, I think for purposes of tonight, I think it'd be good to give just a bit of an overview of what the current language is to the procedure. I think proposed changes or amendments to it will be appropriate for discussion in committee meeting next week, right? And then, the full board will have a chance to review whatever comes out of committee when it comes back for approval. But I think just to orient folks to what it has existed, kind of where the starting point in terms of the procedure would be good and useful for folks so that committee's prepared to discuss next week. And then the full board would be prepared to kind of consider, what gets recommended by the committee.
Okay. So just as I can just talk through it briefly. Anytime, and this is pretty standard procedure that I've seen in many other districts. But any parent or person within the community, and that is one of the things that we changed in the IJJR2, is it has to be someone within our community can challenge a book. And the first thing that happens is they'll voice their concern to the person who provided the materials. They'll have a conversation, and since I've been here, we've never had a formal complaint, but I've had several informal complaints where we've talked through it, or a teacher has talked through it with a parent, and they've, it landed where it landed. If a parent is not satisfied, then they can request a challenge form and fill that out. And once that happens, then the superintendent appoints a committee that is composed of several different types of people. That committee reads the material and examines it, and there's some language about how they're supposed to be evaluating the materials. And then they make a decision and they report it to the superintendent, who lets the person who brought forth the challenge know what the decision was. And then there's also wording in there that no book is removed while it's being considered.
Any questions around, or anything else you want to speak to about IJJ? And then, no, it's just all the references. Anything else, Meg? And then if there's any questions on this policy and what's being proposed to be added back in terms of the procedure.
No. So if people have thoughts or concerns about the policy as a whole, this doesn't have to be the only thing we're considering, but this was what I was coming to you with last spring, is getting this back into the policy. But I'm happy to answer any questions if people have general questions about the policy.
Could you speak to any criteria that have to, I see the categories of people that would be on the committee, but are there any embedded criteria other than their positions that have to be fulfilled? I'm looking at point C.
In D, it speaks to ideally that the members will be neutral on the viewpoints that are being challenged, which I'm guessing means if it was violence that someone had an issue with, that everybody's viewpoint would be, I don't know how you're neutral about violence, but you know what I'm saying, that they don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. I think that speaks to the idea that people are looking at the book or educational material in terms of its educational value or its literary worth, rather than someone having a strong opinion on whatever the hot button item is in the book that the person is upset about, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. If there's nothing else on this policy, and again, we'll be discussing it next week in committee and then be bringing it back. Is there anything you wanted to talk to about the blanking on the letters and so forth, the R2?
IJJR2?
Yes, R2D2. No.
I think the only thing that was changed in there was there's wording around there's a little box that they have to check to say that they've read the material in its entirety. That wasn't there before. And then the other thing that was added is, and I don't know where it is, but that they need. So I have read the material. Yep. And then I think up at the top, Aaron, there's something about from inside the community. And I don't know how the wording landed on that.
Any
Any
resident.
resident or employee of the school district. So that was to keep, because we've, there's been so many challenges from outside of districts. So that was to try and firm that up a little bit.
And is there any appeal process or any, like, once it goes through that committee, it's done?
Correct.
Great.
Yeah. I think other districts have have then given the school board like the power to veto, or it can go, and that has, I think, drawn it out a lot longer. I don't know, but you might have different feelings about that.
Mhm.
No, I think keeping it with the experts is the way to go, and the people the people closest to it. This is something that I'm just like following nationally and locally here. And, I've just heard a recent story about a group of parents that, asked their kids to check out a certain section of books. So I wonder if there's anything that we've been thinking about that would be a response to a bigger collective action. I say this acknowledging that we are in a pretty great district where this doesn't happen a lot. But I think if there is a collective action, do we have any responses around that?
I don't know. I don't know what a response to that would be.
The great thing is, in that example, the community rallied around and just purchased all the books again in multiple
I heard
copies
that
and got
one.
them back into the library. So, I do think that we have the power of community on our side, but just want to think through, other than like a specific challenge, are there other actions that we could be thinking about to be able to be prepared to respond to?
Yeah, I don't know, but we could definitely think about that.
Any other questions for Meg about these policies and kind of what the changes were and what's being presented for consideration? So again, what we highlighted in purple, and we'll put all these materials in for the committee meeting so you can see, but just kind of ensuring we have the challenge procedure, which wasn't an intentional omission at that time, but make sure it's formally adopted back in so that all of these processes, procedures, and criteria are clear in the event, we have to navigate a formal challenge.
I just really appreciate the time. This is something that I talk to people in the community a lot about. And so just having the bigger context, I feel more prepared to be able to talk about the ways that we're protecting our libraries and information in them. So thank you for all your work on this.
Thank you. And I feel like, just to add one thing, like the more educators and admin that are familiar with the policies, the better. And so I think thinking about ways that we can make sure that everyone is aware of what it looks like when there's a challenge, because I think sometimes, someone comes to an educator with a challenge, and if the educator doesn't realize what policies are in place or what procedures we're following, then things can go a little awry at a small level. So that's something I'm thinking about too.
Any questions? No.
Great. All right. We'll look forward to continuing this conversation as we move this through kind of our board dialogue and structures and procedures. So thanks so much, Meg. We look forward to seeing you again online next Tuesday night.
Great. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, Meg. We're good to keep rolling.
Yeah.
All right. I may grab my water.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
Just, while we were doing that, I also was trying to look up the NEPN classification technique for all of those IIJJ, AA, BCDs, or whatever. And there is somewhere a listing of why they're organized that particular way. And that just might be something great to have somewhere.
Yeah.
Because
Could you,
it's literal.
could you forward that to me? I'd love to
Yeah,
track it.
it's-
Thank you.
It actually, does have a way of making sense.
Hooray. Perfect. Right. You ready?
All right. So excited on the eve of our first. Well, no, actually now not our first board meeting before we start school, because we'll meet on Tuesday, September 5th, right on the eve of the first day of school. But excited to do a brief overview of kind of the academic priorities for the coming year with a little bit of a deeper dive in conversation as it relates to our approach to school safety. And that really encompasses one of our academic priorities, but a number of other elements. So the aim tonight is just to provide this overview around the work we're doing, in particular to cultivate safe and equitable schools. So I'll do just a brief highlight of the overall kind of teaching and learning priorities, but then go deeper on this school safety framework, which again encompasses our second priority of safe and equitable schools, elements that we're kind of implementing around mandated trainings and the role that plays in terms of safety. And then most critically, I want to caution that. And finally, the work that we do to be prepared in the event any kind of incident happens. And again, I pause there in that language to just underscore, as we've been engaging in this and rolling some of this out, how much it is actually true that schools are the safest places our young people spend time. And so while obviously of utmost importance to continue to protect the integrity of schools, always want to talk about that in the context of how safe schools are for our students. From a physical kind of active, kind of violent critical incident perspective. And so due attention to it, and also want to always acknowledge that context. As you've heard us talk about, both, former assistant superintendent, co-interim superintendent, Ms. Nally and myself, spoke through the spring, and kind of in prior years, our work really this year is around deepening our work around our academic, priorities. So these, should be familiar, and that's certainly by design. We feel like, at a broad level, we have the right strategies. It's about deepening our implementation and ensuring that there's consistency across classrooms, across grade levels, across school buildings to ensure that each student has access to that work. So our first one related to our achievement and equity priority is strengthening our core instruction, as we've been working on for a number of years. And so some of the kind of key, three of the key strategies there are, increasing students' access to high quality instructional materials. So that's work that includes adoption of our ELA curriculum. K through 8 is our biggest new body of work. As we've talked about over time, we've been rolling out, curricular materials, particularly at the elementary level, but as well some at the middle school level and a few at the high school level to ensure all students have access to grade level content. And that's the starting place for our conversations, and teachers have the kinds of resources they need to provide that instruction. The second priority is deepening our competencies around equitable instructional strategies to kind of facilitate students' understanding of that curriculum and, to ensure all learners have access. So that looks a lot like moves that increase access for all learners. An example of priorities that people have had has been around talk moves, increasing the level of talk as people engage in the curriculum. That was one that was kind of paired with our math work because there was a lot of discourse involved for students to talk about their math, explore the math and the IM implementation. So we're deepening that work as it aligns with kind of our curriculum implementations. And the last strategy under strengthening core instruction is around, disrupting and replacing, systems and barriers that might prevent equitable access. So that can look like a lot of different things. One area of particular focus has been ensuring that schedules allow for access to common planning time for teachers who teach multilingual students and teachers who are case managers for students with IEPs, so that they can collaborate with grade level teachers to ensure those students are receiving services within the context of core instruction, as appropriate and certainly by their IEP. But that's the first place we want to provide access, and that there's collaboration and support. So that's been a priority across grade spans to ensure that schedules facilitate that. But also at the secondary level and at different levels, it's been around ensuring all students have access to high level courses. Has been a high school version of that in terms of different structures that we've been seeking to kind of replace to ensure that all of our students can access core instruction, high quality core instruction. Our second priority is cultivating safe and equitable schools. I'll come back to that in a later slide to go a little bit deeper on our body of work there. But then our third one that we continue to deepen is growing our equity-oriented professional learning communities. So, three key strategies for that priority. Those include ensuring strong professional learning systems so that we have meaningful ways of engaging teachers and supporting and all staff in supporting them, and that time feels efficacious and is enhancing their ability to do what they desperately want to do best, which is meet student needs. So we have a focus on that at the leadership level. The second is around continuing to deepen routines for data and looking at data. We look at the classroom level, school level, and district level. So we're excited today. Our Director of Data and Analytics, Matthew Powers, started. I don't know if we got it in time for the board update, but we also have hired the data manager. So we have a full data team. So we're excited to have organized data to engage with over the course of this year. And then lastly, continuing to deepen our equity literacy abilities. So we use the Paul Gorski framework around equity literacy abilities, really focusing on our staff, from all staff all the way up through leadership. It was something we've reviewed with our new staff, new administrators, in new administrator orientation, talked about in the context of our August Leadership Institute, and as a theme through some of our ongoing leadership professional development and collaboration. But that's focusing on the ability to recognize inequity, discrimination, harassment when it's happening, how we respond. So that's the literacy abilities of recognize, respond, and redress. And so respond is like how we're, kind of responding to the individual incident, and redress is thinking about what are we doing to ensure it doesn't happen again, right? In terms of potential changes and system changes that might be necessary. So certainly always a growing edge and deeper work for us to do there. But, that continues to be a theme of one of our priorities this coming year. So pivoting to talking about our school safety framework. So I want to talk about that second teaching and learning priority in the context of this framework. So this is something we will be using as we're launching the year to talk with families. It'll be included in family communications that we're doing as the school year launches in our staff and community newsletters. We're adding pages to the website, things like that, to be able to raise visibility around this, and will be work that we're including in our engagement with staff as well. So we think about how we organize and create safe schools, kind of in these three layers. So the first and most important kind of is the work that we'll talk about around creating safe and equitable schools. So creating schools where students feel a sense of connection, belonging, have an adult that they can go to. That's how we create safe schools. And that's the most important work we can do to prevent any kind of incidents from happening. So that's a major thrust of this, and want to ensure that that's always part of our conversation when we talk about creating a context for safe schools. The second layer is maybe a little more mundane, but this is around really ensuring all staff have shared knowledge and understanding around some core topics, around, core compliance topics. And, we'll name some of our systems. It's not something that we have done well. We haven't had systems to track, manage, and deliver that content. So we're excited about bringing online through Barrett's leadership, some new tools and systems and folks in his team to ensure we're all starting from the same space as we think about things from potentially as mundane as bloodborne pathogens, which is always the one that gets the joke about compliance trainings, to harassment, sexual harassment, to suicide prevention. So we'll talk about those, and that we have shared common knowledge and understanding about how to deal with those kinds of issues. So that's the next layer of information. And then the final is the incident response training. So I'll talk about three elements there that are more specific when an incident may be happening, right, or is starting to happen, and how we are responding within that. So this is intentionally layered in such a way to ensure that kind of those are obviously hopefully the strategies that we have to use less frequently, but certainly that we have capacity to employ them as necessary. So our Cultivate Safe and Equitable Schools priority, this in some ways will look similar, though there are some evolutions based on learnings and work we did last year. So one, we continue to lean in on, strengthening relationships in our community through the growth of restorative practices. So that really is a lot around our foundational work of continuing to build our capacity. One of the vehicles for that, one of the primary ones that we're building capacity around continues to be using circles as a mechanism around which to build community and hold community. So we've done additional training at the leadership level, modeling what folks will be doing at the building level to be able to continue to grow capacity around that in this coming year. The second is, and this is where you see the biggest shift from the articulation of our strategies last year, which is facilitating social emotional learning by providing evidence-based skills instruction and weaving it into existing curriculum. So if you'll remember this past year, we had launched for the first time the social emotional learning vertical team, like we had for our, other kind of academic disciplines, math, social studies, with a charge of helping to identify what is kind of the curriculum we would be using to be proactive. Much of the work and research and literature about responding to, some of the challenges in school discipline, school safety is around the proactive nature of building students' capacity to engage productively. So we have used, in the K-5 space, we have used a curriculum second step that is, endorsed by CASEL, which is the kind of national national group that's led the work around social emotional learning. And our secondary schools are adopting a curriculum called BASE to begin implementation of this year. So excited about this as an outcome of the work that was done last year to begin to lean in on the proactive side. I think I believe we've had conversations at the board level, but I remember reflections around, and I think of Malia as I think of this, when we were working with APs and talking about challenges of, with particularly with our secondary APs around, what was one of the most common referrals was around, either, verbal or physical like aggression. And so much of the reflection was ultimately we need to be building students' capacity to engage in a different way, right? That there may need to be an appropriate and necessary response from a discipline perspective, but that's not teaching the skills for students to be able to engage constructively moving forward. And so the lack of a coherent, kind of consistent plan on that front felt like a major weakness. So excited to begin that implementation this coming year. And then the third one is familiar, which is continuing to grow our kind of school-wide cultures. This is more through the system lens, through the multi-tiered systems of support. So how we use PBIS as a framework to be able to kind of establish school culture, monitor the data, what's happening, make adjustments, both at a system level and for individual students to be able to have, their specific needs met as we're seeing needs arise by engaging in those practices. So as we've done and done some initial reporting out, and certainly as our data team gets up and firing, we look forward to coming back and talking more about our data to put it in context. But some of the progress monitoring tools we use, on an annual basis, and some of which we're able to look at more frequently, are the first is the culturally responsive tiered fidelity inventory. That's the CRTFI score. So that's a measure that really helps us assess strategy 3 of where a school is at. So in terms of their implementation of PBIS and the foundations that they have for a strong school culture. So our goal is to get all schools to a minimum of 70% on that metric, which kind of on tier 1, which then moves them to be able to kind of focus on tier 2 and tier 3 work. So we have a few schools that exceeded that last year and are moving into tier 2. And then we have additional schools where we're providing coaching and support, as I'll talk about in a moment, to ensure everybody's making progress to that end. And then we look at some of the kind of outcome data, right? What is it kind of netting in terms of impact? So chronic attendance continues to be an important metric for us. At a high level, we saw from the kind of wave that we experienced. I was just reading, that was experienced nationally, as we know, of like, particularly in the post-COVID year, reaching, pretty epic proportions. That's starting to recede, and some reductions in the disproportionality in our chronic attendance between English-speaking students and multilingual learners. So those were signs of progress, but certainly much higher than where we want it to be. So we'll continue to monitor those measures. And then suspension data as well. How frequently are students being excluded from school, and who are those students? So I think at a high level, again, we saw reductions in the use of suspension, but still challenges around the disproportionality in terms of those tools. So as I'll talk a little bit about, so in terms of some of our restorative practices from the Alternatives to Suspension work group, we have some initiatives around how to, think differently at the middle and high school level about some of those, how we're utilizing versions of in-school suspension and so forth to be more proactive in terms of supporting students in their reentry. And then lastly, perceptual data is an important thing. What are students saying about their sense of safety, their access to a caring adult? These are measures we've had for some time that we use on the annual student survey, and many of our schools use as kind of pulse checks throughout the year. And then similarly, the staff survey, in which, that's our TNTP insight survey in terms of what staffs perceive around a range of things, but there are specific elements that we'll continue to use to kind of monitor our progress. So those are tools related to, the strategies and how we'll measure it. So a few notes on just kind of our plans in terms of implementation for this coming year. So first, all schools, and we've gone through a process this summer, and we've done virtually all schools. We still have a few left where schools create annual plans. We call them school success plans that are aligned to our overall district priorities, these three, and then related professional learning plans. So all of our schools have established school level plans in alignment with this, kind of targeting where they're at, because I think, as we all know and experience, our schools are in different places. At the high school, Casco Bay is in a different place with their circle practice than Portland High is, right? And so it allows us to kind of differentiate a little bit of where schools are at and moving forward. So one, just to name that's a core piece of all schools, annual school success plans, and then their related professional learning plans. We are providing school coaching around PBIS. So that's one, through our Director of Mental and Behavioral Health, Chris Reiger. He'll be focusing on coaching at the secondary level, so the middle schools and high schools this year, and through the ESSER funds for this coming year in an effort to kind of build capacity around this work. While we have those funds, we have what we call an MTSS implementation specialist, I believe, Joanna Frankel, who had been, has been the assistant principal at Rowe as a one-year position to be able to coach coach at our elementary schools to ensure progress around that third strategy across our schools. We also have some contracts with a few folks from the state. The state is invested heavily in PBIS, and so we have relationships that some schools who have been invested with, and a few who are involved in some state cohorts around that work as well. So we've been focusing a lot on our leadership capacity, and we'll continue over the course of this year so that we ensure that leaders have the knowledge, skills, and understanding to be able to lead the professional learning in their buildings. Well, certainly, outside experts and technical assistant plays a role. Ultimately, it's all about the day-to-day ongoing work, and we want to ensure we have leaders who have the capacity to lead this work within their buildings and support their staff, and staff and school communities, student and family, to be able to make the changes that we're aspiring to. So that's looked like work that we did at our August Institute. We had our annual kind of summer leadership retreat on July 31st, August 1st, and August 2nd. Again, circles and community building and things like that were a significant focus. And our approach to that is often, and the feedback we get is, we're replicating things that schools will then turn around and do within their professional learning. So got appreciations this year for the explicitness around kind of facilitation as it relates, not just doing circles, but the actual explicitness around the facilitation and tools that they can use as they engage staff in the coming year. A strand of ongoing PD and collaboration will focus explicitly on this for us, the equity-oriented professional learning. So we meet monthly as a group of K-12 leaders with this as kind of our focus. So both deepening our equity literacy abilities and thinking about the related practices as it relates to culture and community development. At the middle schools, we have the fortune of partnering with, this is a place where we are leveraging some external assistance to be able to accelerate progress. So we are continuing a relationship with the organization Attuned that the Bar Foundation is supporting. It's one of 3 work strands they're supporting with our district this year in order to kind of help us prepare graduates to achieve our portrait of a grad and graduate prepared and empowered. So this began last year with a focus at Lincoln Middle School and is expanding across all 3 middle schools this year. So they've been doing work this summer to align their kind of systems and practices to have kind of unified systems and policies and procedures across all 3 middle schools. And they'll be focusing on doing an ongoing cohort of learning with the assistant principals in those buildings around school culture and school culture development. So that it's aligned to all of our kind of key strategies in terms of restorative practices, and PBIS as kind of the foundational frameworks. We have specific continuing our relationship with Jose Bao from Great Schools Partnership to continue providing coaching and technical assistance at the leadership level around restorative practices. So he'll be working primarily with our secondary leaders this coming year to be able to kind of coach and support them around that work, and including some of the folks I guess I'll get to in this last level. So our school level resources. So that's things we're doing at the leadership level to be able to build capacity to hold this work and deepen it over the coming year. And then in large part, for this coming year, resources that we've been able to leverage from ESSERF, and it'll be things that we'll have lots of conversation about. But as you know, we've invested at the elementary level in additional, mental and behavioral health supports. Some of those have taken the form of SEL coaches, so they're helping to provide some of that kind of direct coaching. At the middle school, we now have, starting the year, we had funded this last year. We were able to hire somebody for most of the year at Lincoln and kind of pulled things together at King and Moore partway through the year, but we're starting this year with 3 full-time folks functioning in these restorative practice coach roles at the building level. So they'll work kind of in partnership with the administrative teams and doing both student-facing work and teacher coaching work. So we're excited about kind of really leaning into that. And then coming out of the alternative to suspension work group, we had earmarked some resources for high schools to be able to advance both some of the work around the base curriculum and supporting of that, and some of these efforts to be able to kind of reform, constructs around, in-school suspension to provide those alternatives based on those recommendations. So that's looking a little bit different at each of the 3 high schools, but those are in place and ready to go for the start of the year. So we're excited to have those resources to be part of how we're advancing, as part of what we're doing to advance. And I'll just say, and this will be part of our ongoing conversations as we think about resourcing, and we'll reflect on, successes and challenges of these roles. But I would argue that, our schools have been organized and resourced to be able to execute in kind of a punitive traditional discipline model. And so as we see these manifest, see the impacts on students and reflect on that collectively, I think that's something we'll have to grapple with is what it takes to have schools that operate in a different way in which, they were originally conceived and designed. So from there, this takes us to the next layer down of kind of these required annual trainings. We are, and Barrett, feel free to correct me if I misspeak, but we are excited to be employing a relatively commonplace tool, but for the first time here to help solve for a couple of issues. So this is a kind of adult learning management system that provides course courses, and it's going to organize essentially all of our district PD, as it says, and course reimbursement. So a number of things that are really manual processes for us and get pretty challenging, and we've not been able to track well. This will centralize all of that. In addition, it is the platform that's replacing the system that existed around our professional learning salary structure that we use in Portland. So we had a need because that was sunsetting, and we held together by bubble gum and duct tape last year with the great experience and expertise of Carol Ridlin, but she's transitioned and we have a new system. And so we're migrating that. That's the first priority, to ensure we're able to affect any lane changes that teachers are due and things like that in a timely way. But this system is then going to also be able to provide a number of these required trainings, in addition to be able to kind of categorize any other district trainings that we're offering, and be one place that houses kind of all of that information. So it gets tied back in, and teachers will be able to kind of, that information will feed into the professional learn, the salary PLBSS salary structure. So it's really going to be both from an efficiency perspective, great. But in this context, as we're talking about school safety, it's going to be our vehicle to ensure that we are doing all of these kinds of required trainings and that all staff have participated in them. So staff will, do some of the initial trainings in our September 5th day, but then there'll be a kind of menu that they need to complete outside of that. They'll, receive contact hours and so forth to be able to apply, to kind of either their recertification or salary contact hours. So some of the kinds of modules that will be included here, or will be tracked anyway, because some of these, like suicide prevention, our social work team has done an excellent job doing, doing live. So some of these, are things that are challenging to experience in a, asynchronous PD format. And we want to hold space a little bit differently, but we'll be able to track them all in this fashion to ensure all staff have access. So you can see, I mentioned them earlier, what some of those trainings are. So this is, again, we're operating from a shared knowledge base and expectation about how we should be operating to ensure, in these foundational ways, we're providing a safe and equitable school environment for staff and students. And then finally, and I'll talk for a little bit here, I'll talk about, incident response. So this was the smallest bit, the place we hope to spend the least amount of time, but is also critical to ensure, in the case anything kind of emerges, that we have strong practices to be able to mitigate any threats. So the first is our threat assessment protocols. So we have had in place for some time kind of different model, but similar, called the Virginia Threat Assessment Protocols. And so we've been partnering with the state over the past year to train teams at all of our schools. So CSTAG stands for Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines. And so it's really been a state-led effort that we've signed on to, align to the work that we had been doing. And so we participated in trainings last year. We have members from all school teams, or from all schools that have been trained around the threat assessments. And so the role of a threat assessment is, if, somebody says, I'm going to beat you, I'm going to beat up somebody after school, right? We consider that a threat. And so what's the protocol we go through to determine whether we think it's a substantive threat? A transient threat is one that's, somebody was just blowing off steam and they actually had no intention, or a very serious threat, right? So, so we have a protocol that we go through to make those determinations, to get ahead of any potential issues. So again, we'll be continuing that training, continuing to partner with the state. There are asynchronous modules. I believe the training is upwards of 6 hours on the asynchronous module, and then some in-person training. So we got a large number of people trained last spring, but we'll continue that with a turnover to ensure those practices are, kind of deeply ingrained in our schools. CPI, again, is a body of work we've been engaged in for a couple years. So this is our kind of framework around how we respond to verbal and physical de-escalation. So CPI stands for Crisis Prevention Institute. That's the organization, actually, but that provides this training. But this meets our state requirement of having a federal framework around restraint and seclusion. So we had been a district that had utilized the safety care, which is a common one and folks may have heard of. We had made the decision a couple years ago to move to CPI because it had more significant elements that were geared geared towards verbal de-escalation to try and make, restraint or seclusion the absolute, and state law is now clear that those are absolute last resort options. And we think probably in coming years, the state is going to outlaw that completely, right? Which is the case in many states. We're one of very few states where that's actually an accepted practice. So CPI, we've been working on training teams, and there's kind of two levels of it. So the verbal de-escalation is training that we offer for all staff. How do you de-escalate somebody who's heightened, right? Just in a classroom, any kind of setting. The physical de-escalation is not provided for all staff, but is mainly focused on, some of our administrative team, as well as folks connected to our specialized programs. That's the most frequent use case. So folks associated with our Breathe, Beach, programs primarily to ensure in those cases for students for whom that's the greatest challenge, we have ways to keep them safe and keep staff safe. So those are things, again, we do to prevent incidents from occurring in our building and are key parts of our strategy. And then the last is thinking about how we do respond when there is the potential of what we're, language that we'll be using of kind of a violent critical incident. So what is our response when something, is happening and there's an immediate threat? So, the ALICE framework, ALICE stands for alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evacuate. So this moves and kind of catches us up. There's many kind of versions of this language. Run, hide, fight is another way that it's been talked about. So ALICE is a kind of nationally reviewed, vetted, framework. We are using parts of that. I wouldn't say that we're like all in as an ALICE branded district. We're not going to be putting stickers up in windows and things, but it is common practice and has evolved in the years, unfortunately, since this became an issue that we started to grapple with going back to Columbine. So it moves beyond just the traditional, kind of lockdown and hide in a corner framework to be able to empower folks to be able to kind of make decisions as, in the course of an emergency, if that's the safest option. Again, lockdown is the first kind of preferred thing. Make sure you're safe. And we'll talk about and train folks around kind of enhanced lockdown. So there's a little bit of how that's evolved in terms of our thinking around that. And then counter is something that's only focused at the secondary level. It's not around, engaging, but it's really around trying to distract somebody if you're in that situation. So it's not, fight, I think, is an over-aggressive term for it. But what are strategies you can do, if you are in that level of proximity of somebody who's attempting to perpetrate a kind of violent incident, and then evacuate. There are many cases in which evacuation is going to be the safe, if there's something bad going on, let's move as far away from it as possibly as we can, as quick as we can, but go to the reunification site. So it's organized and managed and all those things. So, we've had reunification sites for all of our schools. We're confirming those. I'll talk about that just in terms of some of our prep work. So, we're, focused on that body of work too, to make sure that those kinds of procedures are updated and clear. So just in terms of implementation plans to support this aspect, a number of things kind of going on. So like I said, the CSTAG and CPI work has been ongoing, so we'll continue with that. So if you're thinking about this of a multi-year effort, that we are in kind of year two for CSTAG, year 3 for CPI in terms of training, but ensuring there are active teams at each building who have those skills and capacity. We're working on updating our district and school emergency management plans to incorporate some of those kind of tenets of ALICE, specifically in addition to some of those procedural things I talked about, clarity around emergency response teams at the building level and at the central level. So people, in the buildings know who's who and what's what and what their roles are, as well as communication protocols. So that alert at the beginning of ALICE, like what are our strategies to ensure people know and that we have backup and redundant systems to be able to communicate, in buildings in times of emergency. So certainly recognize, that's bubbled up the most when, when the PA system, the internet's down, right? So that's an example, but there may be many situations where the internet's just fine, but we don't even have access, right, to the PA, right? Or, and we'll get to the facility stuff. Some of our PA systems we have work to do on, but we need to have backup plans, or if folks have evacuated, we're evacuating. So schools are working through all of those communication systems. A lot of that does rely on, text community. There are only so many options ultimately, to be able to kind of communicate. So making sure that those are clear and people know how they get information. And I'll just acknowledge that also is about how we'll communicate in the event of an emergency, both up from the site, across the district, in the case of a serious, significant emergency, and, to you all and to the broader, kind of community, so that people know what's happening and have accurate information. As we experienced, in November at Portland High, there was a lot of misinformation on social media that was very challenging for everybody. So, and then how that feeds into our school district-wide emergency management plan. So I look forward to partnering with Director Warren, our Chief Warren there to, think about that. And we've been talking with Tamara Sweeney, our Director of Operations, who's gone through some specific training around school safety. So excited for that. And we'll be bringing back that plan for approval, at a later date. So that's on, our radar to bring back as kind of an annual procedure. We had, so this ALIS staff training, again, we did do it with leadership during the August retreat. All leaders did participate in a asynchronous, kind of hour and a half. I mean, it was generally much longer, training to ensure they were well grounded in the ALIS protocols. We are out of that. We are building kind of a turnkey facilitation, presentation and facilitation guide for leaders to deliver in schools on that day on Tuesday 9/5. So that'll be part of, as we've said, that training. We are not going to utilize the ALIS training resources. I think we have concerns about some of the presentation of the material and the way that it's presented with potential bias that plays out, triggering, overemphasizing, kind of it just heightens the fear construct. And I think we want to give people skills and knowledge while managing kind of the the very challenging emotional space it was. It was a challenging it was a challenging day when we did this training as administrators. And so it was a lot of good, productive conversation that I think will lead to a good experience with staff. Then, as I'm looking at Director Hemond, that goes into drill practice and communication to students about what we do. So, we have had, these are not new expectations, but, we'll continue to monitor for these evacuation drills. So 5 times a year, lockdown drills in the context of kind of the, this enhanced lockdown procedure. And then, what we call the violent critical incident, where we're engaging folks and thinking about some of that decision making and what that would look like. So if we have folks evacuating and going to the reunification sites. Want to just highlight and name, that I've been in active collaboration, for a long time, but around this specific topic for over the past year with Portland Police and their command staff. I participated last year here. I audited one of their trainings that was training for their police officers around responding. We did some tabletop exercises over the course of last year, which are kind of scenario based. We collaborated with them and had a debrief after the Portland High incident. And so we're now working with the training sergeant from Portland Police, Sergeant Hayden. He was present with us for our administrator training, and he has reserved time to do training, follow-up training at each of our schools after kind of this initial rollout. So that'll be part of the staff training over the course of the year, is support with him. And so have appreciated that. Certainly lots of good dialogue back and forth about how we kind of partner around this work, and what the needs are within our institutions and how we talk about this. Lastly, just want to acknowledge some of the ongoing facilities improvements to ensure that the physical spaces are as safe as they can be. So we continue to move towards all of our buildings having the kind of exterior door key card system. So many of them have that now. We have CIP funds that have been allocated to bring the rest of our buildings up to that standard. So particular schools are here. This campus, East End, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the others, but that's a part of the work that enables or just facilitates ensuring that all of our doors are closed all the time when people have key card access and we don't have to deal with keys, exterior keys, and propping things open. I mean, the King issue was different, but related, with those kinds of tools, people will be able to close doors and get back in easily, right? Because we do want to, attention we live is, we believe in outdoor learning and the values it brings to students. And so we want folks outside, right? But we want to make sure that people have, easy access in and out and recess and all those things. So that's one. Continuing to assess interior door locks. We have a kind of prioritized list for the facilities team to ensure doors can lock, and that, that's an easy and routine thing that folks are able to do. So there's kind of ongoing maintenance of that. Ensuring that that's true. And then we've been working and have more work to do around our public address and kind of phone system upgrades. Those systems are increasingly integrated. And so we think over time that provides greater access, for folks to be able to make PA messages from anywhere, because the phone systems are double, like classroom phones, with the right code can double as public address things. But we're in a process of updating our systems across all of our buildings. So those are some of the key facilities improvements that are kind of ongoing to ensure our physical, physical plant is supporting school safety and security. So with that, I'll pause in terms of this body of work and open it up for kind of questions.
I'd just like to start with some gratitude, Deputy Superintendent. This body of work that you just presented was enormous, and to be able to have synthesized all of this work and also kind of the implementation that you're talking about that's already happened this year, on top of you being an interim superintendent for half the last year. I just would like to express my gratitude, because this just speaks to so much that we've been hearing from the district about people really needing to feel safe and just needing more information and clear expectations. So I think that this also goes to that foundational piece that we've just been talking about, that the systems and operations have to be there to do anything else. And so I just really am so appreciative of this work, and across the district, all the people that are engaging in this when it is so emotionally heavy and big and scary as well.
Yeah. And one other foundational piece that I should have included in this, and I apologize, is around communication. So safety and operations, but communication, knowing what the work is, and it applies across, particularly the safe and equitable schools, but down to this incident response. And so, like I said, I think early on, we will be including this in our initial kind of staff and community newsletters, the Tuesday bulletin for staff. So framing around all of this, we're launching an initial kind of web page that houses this. So we've seen some great examples from other districts, so that there's clarity out in the community, and we're responding. The vacuum of information is maybe our most challenging, or it's something we have great control over, and can exert influence in to ensure and recognize that there's been a deficit of that. And so that's part of the strategy as it moves forward, to have some of those platforms so that people know what our approach is, and can, that in and of itself, breeding some confidence, as well as following through, people experiencing drills, getting communications that drills are happening, things like that will be part of what I think will be markers of success over the course of the year.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'd love to open it up to questions. I'm going to go Board Member Opperman and then Vice Chair Bondo.
I know how much work you did and have been doing and will be doing on this. And it's, the amount of proactive and then reactive preparation is critical. I have a couple dozen questions. I'll only ask a few. And I think one of the points you brought up in communication is going way back to the concept of circles, which is used a lot, but exactly what it looks like in an elementary school and in a middle school and a high school, and how is it, having been in a situation where you've had, the same group of students for 4 years in a group which is developing relationships, but it can be sometimes very artificial if it's not, in the investment isn't there. And you brought up a point about Casco Bay versus Portland in circles and restorative. And it brings to mind a visit I took out to Peaks, and looking at and seeing being in some classrooms, being in some situations, wasn't circles, it was just class.
Mhm.
And then talking to some of the faculty about who these individuals were that were in those classrooms, were challenging and potentially violent and all. And yet it was not apparent even, and they weren't being particularly good because I was there, but which can happen. But it seems that the size of group and the intimacy of group people working together is critically important. So I'm going to keep harping on small classes. That's a piece of that. But in general, what are circles? How do they work? And then you mentioned tiered fidelity. What's the I?
Inventory.
Analysis. What is that? What do you look at? What does 70% mean? To me, a layperson on that. And then mentioning, so it'd be something I'd love to, I don't think it's just me that wants to hear this.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of lay people would like to hear this. What are the school level plans in all of them? How do they differ? How are they the same? Also, PBIS and circles and all that sort of stuff. And on the training, having been through trainings of those topics, are they based on legal or practical classroom interactions, situations, and having been in a situation where, you had a student who was thinking of the redundancies of communication with people such as social workers or administration at odd times after school and all because of things like, suicide situation. Nobody was there, and that kind of thing. And so as a teacher, it was challenging, worked out, but it can be. So all of the speed of identification and speed of action thing is sometimes a piece that I worry about. And then the CSTAG and the Alice type things, the lockdown situations, I don't know, maybe we have a similar situation, at least with it's for some, that's very traumatic for the kids and they come home and they're traumatic. And I think and the number of them, I know that you have to do that with, we did it since we were little kids ourselves, fire drills. So that it's just, you do it. And are the rooms set up so that it's real, that if they are hiding in a corner, is that corner really safe in every single room? Because I've been in situations where really there was nowhere to hide in a room. I told you, I'm not even, and the parents, feedback to the parents on the Alice stuff. I really think that's really, they're scared. I mean, everybody's scared at this sort of thing. And when you start getting those situations, you shouldn't have to be. Even what I've heard, as much as we have verbal and physical issues, I haven't heard anything go to the level in Portland that it was an issue. And then I'm going to go back to the academic piece, because of course I'll harp on that. And that is, this all takes a lot of time to develop the culture. This takes a lot of time to ensure the safety. And I'm this other piece of people in mind saying, when are you going to do any schoolwork kind of thing? And I really think when we're thinking long-term strategies and all, how do we look at the school day, the school year, the school week, so that we develop these very important aspects that must happen in order for learning to happen, but we get the learning done. That I just knowing how many had planned a test, planned to, re-practice for the AP exam or whatever it is, and boom, we had a lockdown, and it was not known because it shouldn't be known. So, those kinds of things. And I'll stop. Okay, thanks.
Do you want to answer those as a bunch? How do you want to
let me know? I think a lot of them are
there's some overlapping for sure.
But to come back at another time in a lot of, more depth prepared. But if you have anything to say,
yeah,
it's a lot.
Yeah, I think let's see what other kind of commonalities, just so
beautiful.
we don't
Yeah. Okay, so let's get all of our questions out on the floor and we can kind of like batch and respond. If that feels right. Yeah, Vice Chair Bando.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy. It's a lot to absorb, but try to summarize my questions. So on the key strategies, those are three ones here. The growth of the restorative practices and the social emotion and the school-wide culture. I just wonder if those key strategies are all applying to the all levels of schools. I mean, elementary school,
Yes.
high school, and middle school. If yes, and special education as well.
Yes.
Okay, so if yes, my question is, how we measure the success of each of them, because they have all different ways. Because elementary school, they have a different social emotion, learning strategy, and also the relationship. So are we going to use the same progress monitoring here, or they're gonna be different ways or to measure the success on the road?
Okay. Why don't you go ahead with your questions and then I can respond.
And then for that, I just want to see the key strategy for the special education progress, because that's so important. The way we see, I think with now the data team that we have, I think we can capture much better those kind of evolution. And I want to see what we see the parent engagement here, especially on the social emotion learning process, where it's going to be the collaboration with the school and the family as well. So we're just going to be one side of the school playing all those key strategies implementation. That's one. And the second one is on the coaches here. I see on the implementation plan, on the school plan and professional learning, I think it's going to be a team working on the implementation, right? And I see then we have some other coaches, but I don't see any social workers. Are we playing with the social workers on the same time or just coaches?
No, yeah, the social workers are, and we have the continuing investments that are part of that team, as, our guidance counselors particularly at the middle school level, but also at the high school level in terms of the implementation of the base curriculum.
So, okay. So how many coaches we have at the middle school?
3, 1 at each school.
3. Okay. For the restorative practice,
Yes.
Right? On the social workers, how many social workers we have are bilingual?
Bilingual, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I have a follow-up? Please.
Looks like the answer is 3.
3. We have a 3 for all our schools.
We have 3 bilingual social workers that serve the district.
Okay.
They're basically based at multilingual. But
Okay.
we
So
serve
anytime we need them, we just refer.
Yes, we connect, we work and collaborate with the social workers at the building level.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think more we going to the implementation, I think if we can capture the caseload from each of them, so we can have that big picture exactly as the value of the work they're doing, so we can be able to measure those are success on the road. All right. So my last one is on the incident responses. I think all the trainings are going to all school levels, and then each school has its own way to apply those responses, right? Just need to have a clarification.
I would say, there are just particularities about buildings and exits and how they manage within their individual context. So it's similar strategies, but just within the kind of particulars of their school context.
Okay, great. So this is really amazing. I really appreciate, but I'm going to follow really closely for those are key major strategies, especially on the restorative practices and on the social emotion. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Board Member Russell Better.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo the Chair's thanks, gratitude for all of this deep work and really enlightening to me. And I'm sure, just appreciating the desire to share with the larger community a lot of this great work that's happening. The couple questions I had one was just Deputy Superintendent, about the list of the training. So kind of near the beginning of the presentation. Yeah, great. So my understanding was kind of some of the what were you calling them? Incident response trainings are kind of newer, right? Being introduced or kind of being more across the district introduced. But I just was curious, glad to hear about the vector, it sounds like just tracking the trainings in one place. That sounds great. I just was curious, that list of trainings, have those historically all been required? The harassment chat, I mean, those are those for all staff, or is that newer that some of those trainings are now going to be rolled out differently? Just
briefly, there's different cadences in terms of expectation of how frequently they're all mandated trainings.
Yep.
Some are annual, some are every 5 years. We are going to, because spend some time, work through and ensure that everybody's updated on them this coming year.
Okay. And so that's part of the having a system to really have everything in one place, be tracking and making sure people are up to date on whatever it is for that staff positions need. Okay, great. Thank you. And then my other question was just about data a little bit, where you, the slide where the progress monitoring, where you were saying the minimum of 70%, right, with the list of the data. And I was just thinking about, you just mentioned the new data team, which is awesome. And I know work had been done, like when Gavin was here. So just thinking about that list where you had the CRTFI scores, or is it TFI or TF1?
TFI.
All right. The chronic attendance, suspension data, and student staff surveys. Am I right in remembering? I mean, work was done in those areas, right? Is there stuff that's kind of ready for the team to kind of jump right into starting to track that and kind of moving forward as this work is being done? I'm just kind of wondering where things.
Yes, there's historical data. We've collected data on all those measures over the past year, right?
They still have been getting collected.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We collected. We have data from this past year. What we haven't had is the capacity to visualize it and lots of nice.
And analyze it and share it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So all of those that you mentioned tracking, we really are in good shape for the new team to come in and be able to synthesize and then share it. Wonderful. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Board Member Bryden.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Superintendent, also from me, thank you. And also to the whole team. I really appreciate all this exceptional work. First question is relatively simple. The vector solutions, I'm curious about whether there's any opportunity to integrate with ADP, because it sounds like there's the training in the lane and step interaction. I'm curious about whether that's a possibility, to one less manual step in terms of getting people paid what they're entitled to. I'm waiting for you to finish writing. So that second question. So I have three buckets of questions. So that was the first one. Second one is, the incident response topic. I was pleased to see, as you went through, that it would, my initial reaction was, what is an incident? So everything on the first couple of slides in that section was all, violence related. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, fire drill. And I was pleased to see, like subsequent slides, fire drills, things like that. But, things like, natural disasters, I'm assuming that all of that would be incorporated as well, even to the extent of like a disruption, like we don't have internet in our building. Like, how do we deal with that sort of disruption? Is that part of, I'm not asking you to if it hasn't been incorporated, I'm not suggesting that we scramble and try to get it incorporated, but I'm curious about, I guess, to put it another way, how are we defining incident? And how big is that bucket? And then the third question that I have, or the third, area that I wanted to get a little bit more conversation around is the social emotional learning curriculum, which is so important. I also, whenever I hear conversation about curriculum around that, great, super, that's an important component of it. But then that's the theory, and then also in practice. I mean, it's just conflict repair, build connection, rinse, repeat, and so I want to make sure that we are, and I assume that there is work to make this happen, but I want to make sure that we're supporting our staff to be able to not be spread so thin that they can't regulate themselves and model the behavior and support students in, doing the actual work, emotional work that's required. So curious about, and tying that into the staff survey, is it possible either this next survey or a subsequent survey to ask staff, like, what do you need? Are you getting the support you need specific to that area? Hopefully that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other board members? You have any questions? Yeah, Board Member Youssef.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Maybe I missed, did you talk about other district training comparison, or are we looking into other districts trainings? No.
In regards to something specific within this, or
in general for K to 12 leaders, when you talk about the mandatory training?
Some of the content is pretty consistent. We're using for some of the modules, we are using some of the content. And again, Bear, if I go off script here, that exists within these platforms. So it is, some of the modules are consistent. Our social work team has done a great job of building a training routine around the suicide prevention one. So we deliver that kind of in person, right? Not through the online kind of asynchronous training. So it's a mixture, and some of the harassment and discrimination reporting stuff we do as part of the student harassment and discrimination policy and the role of the Title IX liaisons at schools. So it's a little bit of a mix, I think, if I'm understanding your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, Board Member Youssef? And I just have a couple to throw in the mix. I think last spring we heard the difference between what the district's expectation was around circles and what the understanding was. So just like, I'd like to understand how that's being communicated to everybody within schools. It sounds like part of that's coming out in the newsletter, but just that feels really important. Similarly, just how we're getting feedback from staff outside the TNTP survey around specifically this safety pieces or other trainings that we're doing. I am curious what percentage of our equity trainings are still opt-in only versus required, and what that looks like. And then one thing that I just heard from a lot of custodial staff over the last year was just that if people come in halfway through the year, being oriented to the software is really hard. And especially when there are night shift folks, being able to access information and structure to be able to access the systems to do the training is really hard. So just to keep that in mind as we're thinking about instructions or on-ramps for folks to use this streamlined software.
Great.
So you're going to answer all those right now, Aaron. Go. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, let me think just a few thoughts. And I know Barrett could speak to some of that last piece around how we are thinking about new staff orientations and our cadence and what that looks like across a number of employee groups. So appreciate the specific call out around the change and for custodians, we've changed work order systems. So there's a new piece there. But I think the circles, want to continue to acknowledge that like circles aren't the only way that staff build relationship. There's lots of ways and we want to value all of those. So just want to acknowledge that, and that like people make connections to adults and, building communities in a variety of ways through a variety of means, whether it's academic, advisory like structures or extracurriculars, right? So we want to always acknowledge that, the circle expectation will be part of what we communicate, right? I wish I had it on the tip of my tongue, but that'll be part of what we're rolling out in terms of the framing and in terms of the district launch this year. And we know that, in terms of like part of what we'll be messaging, both written and in our like verbal kind of orientation. And we do believe that there is, to the question of what is a circle, they can get, and this is part of, they can get stale, right? So how do you kind of mix them up and think about that? That's stuff for us to continue to be talking about as leaders. And again, in the context of moving towards a culture that values kind of restorative, to the kind of like rinse, like conflict. I forget exactly how you said it there, Member Bryden, but those are skills and routines, right, that need to be practiced so that it can become rinse and repeat, right? And we are not at that place. And so having capacity to sort of, whether it's an advisory, whether it's in a whole class, right, to kind of process something, we believe pays dividends down the long road. So recognize that can interrupt a particular lesson, but if it serves to kind of build relationships such that down the road we're able to progress more quickly is, that's always the payoff around strong kind of classroom management and classroom culture, is that you get further faster by going slower and being intentional around your community. So we work towards that and we'll continue. And there's different, our schools are in very different places. So we'll continue to work and support our leaders around that and kind of manage the expectations in terms of what that'll look like. Assessing, there are a few questions around data and progress monitoring. So, some of these are more challenging for us with some of our week, in terms, and we've debated for some time about like, are we assessing? And we had some informal inventories last year where schools were kind of self-assessing of whether they were fully implementing in terms of the expectation, partial or not at all in terms of circles. So we may continue with some of that practice, the SEL curriculum, similar to some of our other curricula, which again, it would be a whole other presentation, right, around the, ELA implementation. There are some tools that we can use around, like, is it happening? We've, been building capacity internally around progress monitoring of how much, like, is it just happening at all, right? And then to what quality? And there are tools around kind of implementation rubrics that we can use, not in an evaluative sense, but to help us know, are we doing what we said we were going to do? Are we doing it with quality? And then the better off measures really are those that we're talking about, like, are we seeing reductions in suspension? Are we seeing chronic absence come down? Do we see students and staff reporting, positively and in increasing ways around the culture? So we're still knitting together those things, but those are, some of what we've tried previously and will continue to try and use to monitor the implementation of kind of those three strategies in particular. And, just to the call out, I think as we do our reporting, want to make routine, some of what are the subgroups we're monitoring in terms of impact. And so rightfully so, we'll maintain focus on our multilingual learners and what that impact has been, because they're a significant part of our population with distinct needs. And to your point, Member Bondo, Vice Chair Bondo, I think we haven't highlighted kind of the disparities in terms of impacts for our students with special needs. And so we've talked internally about how to continue to kind of raise that as one of the kind of key subgroups that we're continually tracking across all those measures. What is their chronic absence? What's the suspension rate for students with special needs? So excited to have the capacity to be able to report on that in flexible ways. I think talked about a few of those pieces that, and the data. I don't know, Barrett, if you want to speak to anything, if we've yet like the lane step connections and some of the onboarding kind of training while I kind of look at.
I would just say Vector is going to help reduce the amount of manual stuff we're doing currently. I don't know yet how that's going to directly sync with payroll, but I'll tell you that what the process is now is an individual review for folks on PEA to figure out, okay, are they ready to make the lane change based on this PLBSS system, which is really cool. It's an asset. It's why a lot of people want to teach in Portland because of that. So it's actually going to reduce the amount of manual work because Vector is going to allow us to do reporting and say like, okay, this person, they have been here long enough. They have their 180 credits. They're ready to make a lane change. Great. How many people does that apply to? And we can look at kind of getting reports for that as opposed to being, so there's still going to be some
progress is great. Yes. Progress is, yes.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing, I forgot what I was going to say, but anyway, it's going to reduce some of the manual processes that are currently how we are rolling.
Love it.
Yeah.
New staff orientation.
Oh yeah. So new staff orientation, we try to get in a number of like kind of key trainings. So like suicide prevention, we do as part of new employee orientation, because I think that's really important to have that happen in person. We've also reinstituted something that I think happened a long time ago, which is a mid-year new employee orientation, to kind of catch people who we miss. So employee orientation is next week. And so we hire people between then and January. So we did that for the first time last year, in recent memory. And so we'll continue that. And then additionally, collaborating with our social work team, offer the suicide prevention training. So folks who missed it or, joined and left, that's one of the ones that you only need to do every, I forget if it's 4 or 5 years, but, so we try and create some of those other opportunities to make sure, because those are mandatory by statute for all staff who work in schools.
And if anybody else has anything to add, feel free. A few other ones kind of more individual, in terms of how we define disruptions. I think a lot of that's going to live more in ultimately, I think it comes down to only a couple of choices. If something's going on, you either get out, or you stay put. So those are the routines we want to be practiced in so that we can apply them in a variety of contexts. So that raises the importance of the communication, the alert and the inform, with some of those practices. So, again, kind of building out how we are doing that, the language we use. I heard a comment, from new member Opperman, like, it's not actually about doing surprise drills. Like, really the best practice now, trauma-informed practice, is like, this is a drill. This is what we're doing, using clear, descriptive language so that people know what's happening. We're not using code words. We're not using any of those things. It's like, so that people have the best information they can have to make the safest decision, right? So it should include a variety of those things, right? And how we communicate in those scenarios. And then, we don't, TNTP is our annual staff feedback measure. We don't have any other systematized ways where we're kind of gathering feedback. Certainly plenty of, outside of email, but plenty of anecdotal feedback. But there are things, we're trying to build our routines and capacity around feedback and from PD and things like that. But, I'll acknowledge right now that's our primary kind of means. And we don't have a lot of flexibility around the customization of TNTP, because it's a nationally used tool that's been, vetted and all of the kind of validity and reliability things around that. And we do find a lot of value in it. There are some things that, that do really lean. There's a whole domain around culture and climate that relates to all this. I think I got to at least broadly covered this. This was, trying to figure out how much to go deep or not. So lots more to go and to continue to progress monitor over the course of the year.
Beautiful. Anything else from board members? No. Okay, then. Well, thank you again for all this information. Thank you to the team who was here to weigh in as well. And then we'll see everybody on the night before school starts for most people, September 5th. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.